There we go. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be held on Tuesday, February 26th at 7:30 p.m. in the Board of Education meeting room. I will waive my chairperson's report, as most of my updates will come when we talk about update on legislative issues, and we will go to public comment. Nobody tonight? All right, we will move on to the superintendent report. Dr. Landon's good. We will move on to the approval of minutes. When you're ready, Mrs. Stein. Good?
Yep, doing one at a time, so different minutes.
Okay. It is requested that the board approve the following minutes. Minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on January 22nd, 2019. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, second. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, were you at the executive session on the 22nd?
Executive, sorry.
No, sorry.
Okay, a motion, a second. Mr. Maroney. All in favor? That's McCammon, Burke.
Yep, I got it.
Any opposed and any abstaining?
Yep.
Mr. Brown, you would abstain from the executive session?
Sorry, I thought you said
Yeah.
special meeting.
That's all right. Minutes of the regular meeting held on January 22nd. May I have a motion? Mr. Janine? Mr. Burke? All in favor? That is unanimous. And minutes of the special meeting held January 29th, 2019. Mr. Janine moves. Mr. Maroney seconds. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to board committee reports. Any? You want to give a?
Yeah, sure. So we had the first meeting of the Oxridge Building Committee last week. It was an organizational meeting. Two co-chairs were named, Kip Coons and myself, David Deneen, and the secretary, Michael Alfieri. So we discussed future meetings and kind of the organizational structure of the Oxridge Building Committee. The next meeting is this Friday at 7:30 in the morning.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Deneen, and congratulations.
Thank you.
We will move on to presentations and discussions. Further discussion and possible action on the proposed new courses for Darien High School. Mrs. Dunn and Dr. De Silva.
There's nothing else to discuss. I think we're just looking for approval.
So you're looking for approval.
I thought that was a trick question for a second, but we're just looking for your approval.
No. So are there any other board comments or questions on the proposed classes? I will say I do, before we vote, I do have some reservations on the guitar class.
Okay.
The survey was taken in 2012. All of those interested students have graduated, and there isn't, my concern would be there's an increase in an FTE count, and that class would look to grow and expand. And without hearing the plan for that and what the overall FTE count would be, I have some concerns on that. So I don't know if anyone else has any comments or they're ready to vote on the courses, but that is my concern regarding that class. No? Okay, so we will take the courses individually. Do you have them individually?
Yep, I have them individually. You can
Okay.
read about mine are in the order they.
Okay, so may I have a motion to approve the proposed AP Computer Sciences Principles course for Darien High School? Mrs. Stein so moves. Mr. Burke seconds. All in favor? That is unanimous. May I have a motion to approve the proposed Digital Photography Course 2 for Darien High School? Mr. Maroney so moves. Mr. Janine seconds. All in favor? That is unanimous. May I have a motion to approve the proposed Percussion Ensemble Course for Darien High School? Mr. Janine so moves. Mr. Maroney seconds. All in favor? That is also unanimous. May I have a motion to approve the proposed Guitar Ensemble Course for Darien High School? Mr. Maroney moves. Mr. Burke seconds. All in favor? That is Maroney.
Okay, Maroney. I'm in favor.
Maroney.
Mm-hmm.
Deneen. Ms. McCammon. All those opposed? That is Burke, Brown, Stein, and Achman. The motion fails. Maybe we can revisit that course at some point. And that is congratulations on your new classes for next year. We will move forward to the update on standardized testing schedule, including the Smarter Balance assessment and the NGSS field test for science and the high school SATs. Dr. De Silva.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Interim Director of Guidance, Megan Emanuelson, who will be talking about some of the secondary assessments. Alongside her is Corey Gillette, who will be talking about the elementary and secondary assessments as well. And basically today is a typical presentation that we provide about this time of year to go over the testing schedule that we anticipate for the spring. And this is all of our standardized testing, most of which is mandated.
Good evening, Ms. Achman, Dr. Landon, and members of the board. So we're here tonight to give you an update on K-12 testing in Darien. We're going to talk about what's new. We're going to share with you the district-wide standardized testing schedules, and then we're going to talk to you about our plans for parent support. The big thing that is new this year is the NGSS Science Assessment. That's the next generation science standards assessment. That test is going to be given in grades 5, 8, and 11. Last year we had a field test. This year is the actual test, so students will be receiving scores. Parents will be receiving individual scores, though the state does not anticipate that they will get those scores until the fall because it's the first time that the test is being run. In the elementary, just to say one other thing about the test, the science chairs, when they present when you get back after break, will talk more about the test, the specifics of the test and how it relates to the standards. That's not what we're going to talk about tonight, but they can answer any questions you have about the content of the test. So the state recommends 90 minutes for testing for the NGSS. That is not including time to hand out the tests and a break. So in the elementary schools this year, for our first time through, we decided that we will give the test across 2 days, May 20th and May 21st. The plan in the middle school is to provide 1 day and then additional time for makeups. Just like the SBAC assessment, these are untimed tests. So when the state recommends 90 minutes, that is the time that they think the majority of the students will be done. But the schools all have plans for makeups so that any student can take as long as they need to complete the assessments. So that's the plan in 5th grade in the elementary school and then 8th grade. So Megan's going to talk about 11th.
So for the 11th grade NGSS, we selected the date of May 29th. We'll be doing a little bit of a modified schedule that day with probably 2 extended blocks for the grades 9, 10, and 12 to allow them to attend regular classes and also to allow time for the 11th graders to complete that testing, and then regular school day will resume after that. Any students who are not available to take the test that day, we will be arranging for makeups for them so that they can get the test in as well.
Uh-oh.
It's the arrow up on top, Corey.
You were right.
Left.
This one?
Up
Uh-oh.
to the right.
Here. Here, you click. I can't do it. Sorry. Who said that there was going to be an error with the... Yeah. Where is it? Oh, that arrow. Okay, great. Okay, so we're just going to talk about the K-12 testing schedule. As you can see, the SBAC is going to be given in grades 3, 4, 5, similar to last year, May 6th through 24th, and then the science test, like we just said, is May 20th to 21st. Similar to last year, in the elementary schools, multiple grade levels will be testing at a time, so the extended window is really time for the schools to accommodate makeups. The state gives us time into June to complete all those makeups, but our goal is to complete all makeups by May 24th. Similarly, in middle school, you can see that the SBAC is scheduled May 3rd through 10th. So they also do multiple grade levels testing at a time and then additional days for makeups. Their plan, like we said before, for the science is May 6th.
And as you can see, we have a lot of standardized testing at the high school level. So every October, we do offer the PSAT. It is an optional test for grades 10th and 11th grade. This year it was on October 10th, and we tested 510 students, so that was quite a number of our students taking that. This year, the SAT, which as you probably know is a required test by the state of Connecticut now, that is our state exam, will be offered on April 9th. The logic, we had our choice between two dates. The other date was in March 27th, and that was actually the same week as our high school musical. So trying to be sensitive to what else is going on for our students, particularly our juniors that week, is if you've ever had a child involved in the musical, you know it's a very, very difficult week, tech week, and dress rehearsals, so we wanted to be sensitive to those students. It also allows for 2 weeks less chance of snow, which is always a good thing. So we'll be doing that on April 9th. We would like to run the exact same schedule as we did last year. We found that that worked very, very well with our juniors coming in first thing in the morning and our 9th, 10th graders who are not taking the PSAT. I'll get to that in a minute. Anybody not taking the PSAT in 10th grade, and our seniors coming in about a 4-hour delayed opening with buses coming in late, closer to noon, with students going to classes from noon on. And then we actually are allowing our juniors to be bused home in the afternoon after that. So the students will come in late to school, and then our juniors will go home on a bus route. What else do I want to say about that? So the PACT, we're going to offer that the same day. That's an optional test for 10th graders. Last year we had a little bit over 200 students take that. While we were on a modified schedule for the high school, we thought that was a good opportunity to offer that test as well. So registration for that will be probably the first week of March. Again, it is optional. Registration will be through the school, but we'll do that at the same time in a different part of the building so that SAT will be not impacted. But logistically, it works out well with proctor availability and the use of the building. So that is PACTs. AP exams, we're in registration for AP exams this year. We anticipate, similar to last year, administering about a little over 900 exams to more than 400 students. So we are registering for that. It's a 10-day window of regular testing. There's about 34 exams that College Board offers, 34 different AP exams. And then we'll enter into a late testing window as we need to. And then, as we talked about, NGSS at the end of the month after those same junior students have cleared their SATs and their AP exams as well.
Right now, I'll try the arrow. There we go. So this is our plan for informing parents about the work that's going to be going on and about all these assessments. We are planning to give 3 different workshops, one for each grade level. And we're going to talk about the tests listed above, the NGSS, the SBAC, and the SAT. We plan to talk to parents about the tests, the dates for the tests, the preparation, and then how the tests are scored. And this will be distributed across the schools and on the website and then sent out through School Messenger. That is our update.
Thank
Questions?
you. Board questions. Mrs. Stein.
Just a question. Are we going to move to School Cash Online for registering for APs next year? I noticed in the DPS that it is check this year, and I know we are trying to go online. Maybe this is a question more for Mike Feeney.
I think so. I do not believe so. I believe the testing is going to be revamped, or at least the way that the board actually collects. So they will be collecting the funds directly and not the Board of Education. So that's why we did not use School Cash Online this go around, because we felt that it would be too much of a learning curve for them to learn School Cash Online and then the following year do something different.
College Board, you'll start to hear a little bit about it. College Board is moving the timeline for AP registration. Like we're doing it now for this year. They're moving it for the 2020 testing to October and November this fall. So we'll be doing AP registration in October, November for a May exam. So I'm assuming that College Board, the plan I think is to eventually go with their own online platform. Those details of how they're planning to do that are unclear at this point.
So will we hear a little more about that at some point, and it doesn't need to be tonight, but
Certainly.
I imagine in order to be recommended for an AP course, October, November seems early for teachers. with that recommendation and
So
placement?
that would be just the registration for the exam.
Oh, just for the test, okay.
Mhm.
All right.
So it would be, it is
Yeah.
a large shift, though.
Yes.
There's lots of interesting changes coming. There's going to be a new online platform and that we're starting to discuss with our teachers. They're really just starting to share this information with us.
Okay.
It sounds like it's going to be great changes for kids, but
Great.
it does move the registration up. They'd like kids to commit to
Significantly.
taking the exam in the fall.
Earlier on. All right. Mrs. McCammon?
You may have covered some of this in the beginning, but the next generation science standards, I think it's exciting that we're looking at science on a variety of formats or forms, including testing. But you could just review the use of the test for the school system. I assume it's for program evaluation. Is it for placement, and what impact does
I'll
it or
take-
does it not
I'll
have
take that
for
one.
individual
I'll
students?
take that one.
Yeah.
So right now, one of the biggest shifts that might happen might be around scope and sequence. You're going to hear, as Corey mentioned, 2 weeks from now on February 26th, both Christian Dockham, the Department Chair for Science, alongside Linda Johnson, will be here to discuss what their scope and sequence looks like now. We do not have any data from the next generation science standards to indicate if there'll be shifts there. Other than that, we do not use standardized tests at this time for placement per se. So we wouldn't anticipate doing that at this point. If we believe that that would be valuable for some reason, perhaps in the future, but I would not suggest that any of those kinds of decisions would be made as a result of this assessment at this time.
What about any benchmarking
Can you describe what you mean, benchmarking in comparison
to their peer cohort for an individual student for their progress in the sciences?
It would be really hard to judge until we know what the assessment results look like and how well aligned it is to our curriculum. Our curriculum is new.
Okay.
We just finished up our units for the elementary level and implemented them this year. We have draft units for the middle school. Those are not fully fleshed out, and you'll hear about some shifts that may have to happen at the high school as a result of next generation science standards. So it would be hard to make that prediction now until we know what the results look like. We see pattern over time, and we see how well our curriculum's been implemented.
Thank you.
So is it similar in that sense to the SBAC, given that this is the first year of testing, that it is really information and data collection at this point rather than student-centric?
For sure, this coming year. After, I think for us, the biggest judge will be once our curriculum is completely fleshed out, then we can see the assessment results, see where there may be gaps, if that's the data that they give us. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily know at this point how that data will be distributed to us, how much detail we're going to have, whether we'll know if it's content, if it's cross-cutting concepts, whether it's the dimensions of learning, we don't really know. So once we have that, we'll have a better sense of whether or not it's a useful tool. It may not be.
Yeah.
So it will really
But we
depend.
have the test. They got the test ready. Any other board questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you both very much. I appreciate it. We will move on to the update on kindergarten enrollment. Dr. De Silva for 2019-2020.
Yes, ma'am. Just get to that document. Okay, so what you do have, and you'll have for the next several months, is an enrollment figure based on the number of students that have actually registered. So many parents will have taken packets but won't have officially registered. These numbers are based on the children that have officially registered. What's actually there in red is not accurate. Total K is 255 students. That number there includes the ELP program, 71 students. What's important to note with that number is that number will continue to rise you've heard this past winter, based on the number of students who may come to our program with an IEP. Then we also match them to general education students. So right now that number is based off of the children that entered in by way of lottery and or are continuing on another year with us in the ELP program.
Any other board, Mrs. McCowan?
So based on that number for ELP, are you currently targeting about 8 sections, 7 sections from a budgetary perspective? I know we usually run 8, but...
Right, so the class size range is you'll see those numbers right at the bottom. It's 10, 12, and 15. So based on 71, I would imagine about 8.
Well, Mr.
But that number will continue to grow. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, what did you budget for this year?
In which section?
For ELP? I think we looked at, we budgeted 90, currently 71. So budgetarily, you have 9 sections, I would assume.
8, I think.
class roughly?
10, 15.
Yeah, but growth over year. They always leave room for growth.
And do those have registrations as well?
Mm-hmm.
For 1920, we have 8 sections budgeted.
Okay.
2 at Oxbridge, 4 at Royal, and 2 at Tokenie.
And you have enough room then with the 90 projected?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
what the 8 is based upon the 90. 8 sections.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Any other board comments or questions? Mr. Maroney?
So, with this chart, I guess, is how I have trouble dissecting it in that I can't compare it to other years. So, what is the typical run rate from February till March, and are we tracking?
So I can tell you, based on these numbers in comparison to last year, some of our schools are tracking exactly where they were. For example, Holmes, Oxbridge, and Royal actually are as well, based on last year's numbers. Tokenique is running slightly lower, as is Hinley.
Okay.
And as typical, we'll receive a more formal update on this closer to the school year.
You receive the same update every month,
Yeah.
which will have the total that'll just say kindergarten, including the ELP changes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other board comments or questions? Thank you very much. We will move on to discussion on the 2018-2019 financial report and possible budget actions on the proposed budget transfers. Mr. Feeney, when you're ready.
Okay. This past week, we held our budget committee meeting, and as you're well aware, as I'll go over, this will be a 10,000-foot view as to where we currently stand. As typical, we do break it into 4 different categories. One would be salaries, fixed expenses, operating expenses, as well as revenues. At a higher level, right now, the report shows a favorable balance of $157,000. Some of the highlights that we'll briefly discuss today, as well as was discussed in detail at the board meeting. Staff movement and some vacancies. We're also proposing a reconciliation of the substitute lines. Another highlight is the legal projection, as well as the acquisition of the AC units at Royal, Hinley, and Holmes. When we talk about the salaries, as we've talked about it in the budget committee meeting, we are showing a positive variance in those accounts of $289,000. However, with that being said, 93% of the $289,000 is attributed to 3 vacant positions, one could say, which would be under technology, the administration, and we also had a change in staffing of guidance. As you recall, the guidance counselors had moved up to become an assistant principal, and that also had changed a variety of different positions as well. It's important to note that those positions are still going to be factored into next year's budget. For example, we still will have to have a superintendent next year, so that would be factored in. As I mentioned briefly, we do have some adjustments under the budget transfer section, in particular for the reconciliation of the substitute accounts. That was talked a little bit more in detail at the committee level. And then I also wanted to highlight, because there were some questions, and going forward we'll always have this section as well, some of the prior authorization of budget control, and you can see the areas where that has come into math at the high school, social studies at the high school, a curriculum instructional support specialist, as well as a special education aide as well. Under operating expenses, we do show a negative variance of $150,000. And of that amount, 67% of that shortfall is related to RC16 legal, as well as RC24 legal, which was also discussed a little bit more in detail. And the remainder that's driving that negative balance of $150,000 is a proposed transfer for the acquisition of the 46 air conditioning units for Holmes, Hinley, and Royal. Our fixed costs right now, which would include our health insurance, utilities, transportation, and workman's compensation, are on target with where our projections are. And our revenues, as what was reported at our last financial meeting, we do have a positive variance under the revenue of $60,000 additional amount, and we'll continue to monitor the excess costs as we move forward with our final filing. And with that being said, I can entertain any questions you may have regarding the financial report.
So Mrs. Ritchie isn't here tonight, and there are many questions at the Budget Committee meeting, but are there questions of the full board this evening? Thank you, Mr. Feeney. May I have a motion to approve the proposed budget transfers as reported by Mr. Feeney? Mr. Deneen, seconded by Mr. Burke. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. And we are on to the main event this evening. Further discussion and approval of the 2019-2020 proposed Board of Education budget. We will go slowly. Please bear with us. It says Dr. Landon, but usually at this point it's our show. Is there anything before we start down these modifications you want to let us know?
I did send out a memo today suggesting that the security provision of a guard booth at the high school be moved from Category 2 to Category 1, with the thought being that we have completed the title search and have found there's no need prohibiting us from putting the guardhouse on the property. I'm sorry.
Dennis, that's your job.
That's one. We have a traffic study underway. We've discussed the provisions with the police department, and we've had some discussions because of concerns with environmental and planning and zoning. It's my belief that we should have the traffic studies done and cost estimates in before the end of this year, this school year, and thus we would then move on and move forward. I mean, if the board approved, we would move forward to the P&Z and the environmental division, and continue to work with the police department and come up with a final proposal with our engineering company to present to the Board of Finance and the RTM. And assuming that could all be done by the end of this year, then we could get underway with the construction of the booth for next year. On the other hand, if we weren't done with it, it would certainly be done early on in the next school year. And once that was done, then we could have the construction underway. And that's why I'm suggesting we move it into Category 1, so that if we can't do it this year, we'd have the funds. If we have it in this budget, we can have it done in the next school year in accordance with our budgetary requests.
Okay, so we will move through modifications and open discussion on that issue when we get to it. I'm going to go through Board of Education modifications. Did you do? You start with Mike's.
I just go down the list.
Okay. All right. So we will start with administrative regulation recommendations. There's a motion to decrease RC1 DHS 123001 by $2,000 for new furniture equipment. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, second. Mr. Maroney, is there any discussion on this matter? All in favor? That is unanimous. Motion carries.
Sorry, Mike, will you just double check
Yeah.
that what I have are correct when she's reading them?
Yes.
Yeah, so Duke's going to take notes as well, and we'll have a triple. So the motion carries. Motion number 2, to decrease RC3 MMS 12303 by $11,785,000 for new classroom furniture. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney? Mrs. McCammon? Is there any discussion on the matter? All in favor? That is unanimous. Motion carries. Motion number 3, to decrease RC11 PE/Health 21201 by $45,000 for director. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney, Mr. Burke, any discussion on the matter? Again, this is a recoding. All in favor? The motion carries. Moving on, motion 4 to increase RC11 PE Health 21204 by $45,000 for the assistant director. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, Mr. Maroney, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Motion number 5 to decrease RC19 curriculum 24012 by $7,776 for standardized testing. May I have a motion? Mr. Brown, seconded by Mr. Burke. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Motion 6 to increase RC 15 Tech 13035 by $7,677 for software maintenance. May I have a motion? Mr. Deneen, seconded by Mr. Maroney. All in favor? I didn't ask for discussion, but there wasn't any. Motion carries. Motion 7 to decrease RC 24 Special Ed 21303 by $65,840 for special class teacher. Mr. Brown, Mr. Burke, is there any discussion on the matter? Mrs. McCammon.
I had asked for confirmation that that there still is a mechanism to provide services for children who aren't blind, who might require some sort of vision, so that we can still be in compliance.
May I ask that?
Yeah.
And I think Dr. Landon had mentioned it last week. BESB has been providing those services. We have about 14 students in the district currently who have services, 12 of whom have consult services. So we're confident that we have the right services. They've been really wonderful to work with. They've actually helped us really understand and gain new insights. So we're confident we have the right people supporting us. And
So
we'll be able to.
If you have children who are not blind, it wouldn't necessarily be served by Connecticut Services for Children Who Are Blind. Do they also consult in for those children?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Call the motion. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. I like it when that happens. Motion 7 to decrease RC 24 Special Ed 21303 by I just did that one. I'd love to be able to do it again, but motion to decrease RC 24 Special Ed 21307 by $40,777.50 for speech therapists. May I have a motion? Mrs. McCammon and Mr. Burke. Any discussion? All in favor? And that is unanimous. Motion number 9 to decrease RC 26 ELP 21603 by $37,754 for teacher's aides. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, second? I need a second. Mr. Maroney? Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Motion to reduce RC3 MMS 21220 by 27,000.
Did you do the furniture? Yeah. The furniture.
I think we're on 26.
Teachers' aides. Motion 9 to decrease. No, we did this
No,
one.
replacement classroom furniture.
All right, I'll just add a new motion in. May I have a motion from RC 26 73020, a change of $3,200 for replacement classroom furniture. May I have a motion? Mrs. McCammon, seconded by Mr. Burke. All in favor? That carries. So I have two cheat sheets. It's okay. All right, and now we will move on to Board of Ed modifications. Mr. Feeney, you're watching my numbers, right?
I am. If you want me to just give a summary. So the administrative
Yep.
changes that you've just done has an adjustment to the superintendent's proposed budget of $161,356.50. So the difference right now, or the percentage change, goes from a 2.98% increase to a 2.82% increase.
Okay, so we're at a 2.82.
Correct.
Okay. We will move on to DHS. I just want to make sure you and I are on the same motion now. I don't have 10. 10 doesn't show on mine. What did it make mine? Thanks. I'm cheating this. We will move on to Board of Ed modifications. Motion to decrease RC1 DHS 21220 by $113,197.72 for curriculum supervision. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney, is there a second on this motion?
This one is the one to, sorry, I'll ask the question after.
Well, is there a second? If there's not a second on the motion won't be open to discussion.
I'll just second it so I can make sure.
Mrs. McCammon. That's one way to get the question out. All right, is there any discussion?
All right, there are two adjustments, and these are to not have the curriculum supervision folks teach classes, both
Correct.
of these. Okay, so if we vote yes for this, the curriculum, the department's heads will continue to teach.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a
Okay.
series in various
Yes.
RCs.
Okay, and that's the next two.
It would be the next 7.
It
All
would be
the
the
first
next
7
7.
lines would
Okay,
relate to that.
okay.
We have to vote on them each because they all have their own lines.
Okay.
So yours.
So I'll just make a comment with tremendous respect for Dr. Landon's research and recommendation. I have heard from a number of parents who have been really pleased with having the department heads teach their 6th graders. I just have a hesitation about changing the model at this stage, although I appreciate that you came here and made a recommendation. So I will
So
just
my only follow-up, as I understood your comments, is this is not Dr. Landon's recommendation, it's the administration's recommendation, which may not negate how you feel on it at all, but I am correct, Dr. Landon, that you feel that your administrative team recommended this. This is not a you're in for 1 year recommendation.
No, this is not a one-year recommendation. And again, the reason for the administrative recommendation is because it was felt that the children could be better served and supervision could be more ongoing and more direct of all of the teachers and all of the departments.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's a win-win from my perspective.
So are there any other, Mrs. McCammon?
Again, I appreciate the point. For me, it would be for the administration to take another look and see if there isn't a way to redress the concerns about the kids. So we set it up so that your high school teachers, so that your kids who are used, your department chairs who are used to high school have a chance to see middle school and vice versa. And I am, the more I think on it, appreciate the recommendation, but reluctant to let the model go.
Mrs. Stein?
Can you clarify? I thought when we asked this question earlier that they would still rotate where they're housed,
Yes.
just not teaching classes, so they'll still
That wouldn't
experience
change.
those buildings. I will say from the high school perspective, when you have high school students who like to go and see teachers off, class hours, not having a teacher available can be a stressful thing for a student. So I would give the opposite for the high school.
Any other comments or questions? My only comment would be, I've heard that the department chairs enjoy their classes. I can appreciate that parents might enjoy having a department chair as their teacher. For me, it comes down to what's in the best interest of the kids educationally, and that would mean that no child should feel like they can't access their teacher because that teacher has administrative capabilities and responsibilities as well. So with that, this is a motion to keep the current model rather than going with the administrative's recommended model. So is there a motion in favor of this cut? Or I'm going to call the vote. Sorry, who's in favor? Can I vote in favor? Mr. Maroney's in favor, and Mrs. McCammon is in favor. Mr. Brown is in favor. All those opposed? Mr. Burke is in favor.
No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mr. Burke is opposed. Mrs. Stein is opposed. Mrs. Achman is opposed, and Mr. Janine is opposed. The motion fails. We'll move on.
So then
I think
as a
mine's probably
series,
yours now.
then we have to,
We have to do it as a series. So as a series,
these have to, yeah.
in theory, votes might match. Maybe they won't.
Well, if they don't match them.
Yeah, if we don't match, we have a problem. Motion to reduce RC3 MMS 21220 by $27,609.80. Is there a motion? Mrs. McCammon so moves. A second? Mr. Maroney? All those in favor? Mrs. McCammon? Mr. Brown and Mr. Maroney? All those opposed? It's everyone else. Mr. Burke, Mrs. Stein, Mrs. Auckland, and Mr. Janine. Bear with us now. Motion to increase RC1 DHS 110118 by $14,441.20 for English teachers. Is there a motion? There's no motion.
I think in the spirit
Motion
of
fails. We'll
moving
move
along.
on.
Yeah.
Someone always needs to open it. Let's open it, and seconds will fail. Motion to increase RC1 DHS 110130 by $14,441.20 for math teachers. Is there a
You want it
motion? Mrs. McCammon so moves, and then there's no second, and it doesn't carry.
So you want me to do
Yep.
Jill
Is there a
first?
second? The motion doesn't carry, fails. Motion to increase RC2 Fitch 21302 by $14,441.20 for the alternative school. Mr. Brown so moves. Is there a second? Seeing no second, motion fails. Motion to increase RC3 MMS 310324 by $14,441.20 for foreign language teacher. Is there a motion? I need someone to open it. Mrs. McCammon, is there a second? Motion doesn't carry. No second. All right, I
One
don't.
more. Oh, it's
Seven
science
can do.
teachers.
Motion to increase RC3 MMS 3100338 by $14,441.20 for a science teacher. Mr. Brown, is there a second? Motion fails. All right, we're back on track. Bear with us so we can move through all these guys. Substitutes. Oh,
Okay.
Mr. Feeney, you did all these individually, correct?
I did, yes.
Okay, these are substitute teachers. These are mine. Sorry, I will put you all through this. Motion to decrease RC1 DHS 21302 by $3,644 for substitute teachers. I'll open. Is there a second? Mrs. Stein, is there any conversation on this? It was discussed at length in the budget committee.
So this is the administrative adjustment to a
This was my
to reduce it.
recommendation to cut the substitute lines, and Mike's recommendation based on my desire to cut those lines.
He adjusted.
Yes, he adjusted. Any other comments or questions on this one? All right. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Motion to decrease RC5 Hindley 21301 by $1,425 for substitute teachers. Is there a motion? Mr. Burke? I'll second. All in favor? Any conversation, comment?
One thing to say quickly, just because it was my proposal. Just wanted to say it was with great difficulty and reticence that I
No,
proposed.
substitute teachers.
Oh,
Yep,
whoops.
Whoops. You're ready for
Wait a
something,
minute.
but it's
Ready
not
for
that
the
yet.
next one.
Substitutes again later.
Yeah.
Psychology.
You can get ready.
No comment.
All those in favor of the motion to cut substitute teacher line? Unanimous. Get ready, Mr. Burke. I might call on you again.
Okay.
Okay. So now we move on to the psychologists. Motion to decrease RC5 Hindley by 21403 by $35,452.50 for the psychologist. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke. May I have a second? Mr. Brown. Any comments? Mr. Burke.
Now, thank you. Sorry. It is with difficulty and reticence that I propose this cut from 4 additional psychologists to 2. I was impressed with the sincerity and presentation by the elementary school principals and the public comments by the parents who spoke so eloquently and personally to us. The principals are the leaders of their buildings, and our fellow parents are partners in the mission of this board. When principals and parents come here and advocate as they did, I think it's incumbent on us as a board to give them deference. And I did, because frankly, before they came here, I was prepared to advocate cutting all 4 proposed additions. Without greater detailing of what the current caseloads are related to non-IEP or 504 plan students in these buildings, I cannot in good faith sanction a full doubling of this staff. If we add 2 positions, that will provide 8 psychologists to cover our 5 elementary schools. I well understand that the proponents of this expansion assert that it is more than just caseloads, as the additional professionals would be asked to advise staff, provide programming on salient social, emotional health topics in the classrooms. At its heart, however, this doubling of staff has been described to us as a response to a crisis. But to me, the crisis has been insufficiently defined and, more importantly, quantified to justify the addition of 4 FTEs at this point. The principals gave alarming examples of episodic events. No one wants to have to clear classrooms because of a troubled child. No one wants to have a child to have to be coaxed out of a parent's car to start a school day. A few weeks ago, Dr. Landon advised if we build it, they would come. I propose that we build more capacity and diligently track how it is used. We can always build additional capacity to meet a greater demonstrated need in the future. That's it.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions? Mrs. McCammon.
I appreciate the thoroughness of your comments, Mr. Burke. Thank you. It's helpful to see how you're breaking down the question of psychologists. I thought that your point about struggling to understand caseload was a valuable one. It was difficult as a board member to see how the non-IEP related caseloads were being tracked. However, I think that there were multiple drivers, and the main driver that you're missing is that we are looking to build out a much more robust SRBI program and a much more robust social emotional learning program. And so in addition to managing crises, which are important but should not be the major driver, I agree with you, to this decision, we also have a compliance issue. So I think when we have staff who work a number of hours under contract and we have IEP mandated services, when those mandated services are not in line with contractual hours, we have a compliance issue. So I think that's to your point, that a minimum of 2 are mandated. However, I think we have a question before us, and that is, do we want to be proactive in the building of social emotional learning in our schools? And do we want to be able to respond to crises? I would agree that no matter what the decision is, we do need to track caseloads better for non-IEP mandated services.
So on that, I think I would agree with Mrs. McCammon in the sense that I don't think we're looking currently to just cover. I think we are noticing an increased need and an increased demand both on staff, teachers, and we are asking classroom teachers to also be psychologists at this point, and that is not something that they are really trained to do. And so that creates a model where we could end up in situations that would be less than ideal for everybody involved. I would like the administration to take this year and to track. We currently are housing 1 psychologist in special ed and 1 psychologist in the general education program, and to see if that's really how we're allocating time, and if that's great, but if we need to make different allocations to best understand the use of the psychologist's time to really be able to test, where and how we staff, that would be great. So if we could do that in the coming year and then next budget come back and decide, are we really 1-1? Do we need 1.5 in general ed and 0.5 in special ed, or the reverse? But I think that would be important, and that would help kind of people understand the need that we are going, or we are experiencing. With that, are there any comments or questions? Mr. Brown.
I guess the only question I would have would go to the compliance issue. Is 2 the absolute minimum we need to cover the compliance at this time? Or is it 1, or is it 0.5, or do we have an actual metric on that? I haven't heard that.
Is there a compliance concern? Are we currently in compliance?
Yes, we are in compliance. And I think what we presented to the board in prior presentations is that we do that by exiting meetings when we have to, responding to crisis or intervention when we have to. We're making do, but at what expense? And I think we spoke about the expenses, that we're not able to do any constructive work with children within the classrooms, within the teachers, to really work on child development and issues that are related to healthy social living. I think we also spoke that our teachers and our psychologists and our administrators not only are sometimes called to leave meetings with PPTs, which are compliance, and we'll pause, we'll come back and reconvene, but it interrupts the whole fidelity of the process. And I think when you look at the fidelity of the process, when you look at access to psychologists during the school day, that both the principals' presentations and ours, we hope, really said that yes, we're in compliance, because that's our commitment, the district's commitment, but the cost that we're at really interferes with the fidelity of the process. I hope that answers the question.
All right. Any other comments? Mrs. McCammon?
I think the question of compliance is a dangerous one to break open, but I would challenge that we are, because technically if we need 41.2 hours per 6-day cycle and contractually we're only providing 36, I get that we're making do, but technically that's not compliance to me. I mean, we may be meeting the needs.
I think we need to be
you're
careful
doing it
whether
by
we find compliance individually or compliance by the law. The Darien school system is in compliance under the law. However, we are stressing that.
Well, we have people working extra hours to be in, so that we don't.
Can I just say that when it comes to 504 and our special ed obligations, we are in full compliance, and there's absolutely no question about that. The fact that some psychologists take their evaluations home, for example, and spend, let's say, an extra 5 hours at least, is consistent with what we expect our teachers to do as well. We don't expect our teachers during the regular school day to create their lesson plans, to grade papers, and so on. So they too spend time above and beyond what the regular school hours are that you would expect an employee to be working. And I think it's a tribute to our teachers that, in fact, they do spend that extra time at home on weekends after school. But as far as compliance, we are in full compliance.
So why don't we call the vote then at this point, unless there are other comments? All right.
Sorry. I think it's important to reiterate something Mrs. McCammon said, that one of our district goals is social and emotional learning, and this ties directly into that, and it supports that, much less the fact that the principals were here telling us that elementary kids are suicidal and they need help to deal with this, and to do two people to try to cover that seems like, how is a kid going to know that he has to have his suicide day be on Tuesday when a psychologist is being staffed at that particular school for him or her on that day? I mean, it doesn't work that way. So you can't skip that. These needs are going to arise, and you need someone there to staff it. You can't have someone driving 20 minutes from a different school to deal with a kid who has a problem. And I have the question of, what is the right amount of crisis? Does it take a suicide to be enough that we say, okay, well, we missed that boat, sorry, we should have done this a year ago? I mean, I think we have to be proactive, as Ms. McCammon said, that this is a necessity, and because we don't want to have that happen on our watch. So we need to be ahead of the curve as opposed to being behind.
Okay. With that, I will call the vote. All in favor of this decrease? Mr. Burke? Yes. All opposed? That's Mrs. McCammon. Mr. Brown, where are you on this one? Mr. Brown? Mrs. Stein? Mrs. Ockman? Mr. Deneen? And Mr. Maroney. Mr. Brown, did you decide where you are? We need a vote. This is for cutting the psychologists down to 2. You can abstain. I know, Mr. Thank you so much, Mr. Davis. Okay, so Mr. Burke and Brown voted yes. You will see this again. Everyone knows how we're reading it now. Motion to okay. Motion fails. We will move on to the decrease of RC 7 at Holmes 21302
I confirmed it is a dollar.
by $1.
It is.
Mr. Feeney?
Yes, correct.
You're making my substitute cuts tough. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein. I have to second it on this one, or I'll take the hit on this one, Mr. Deneen. Mrs. Bachman. Is there any discussion on this? All in favor? It is somewhat formula driven. Apparently $1 came out. The motion carries unanimously. All right, we are moving on to the decrease in a psychologist at Holmes. So a motion to decrease RC7 Holmes 21403 by $35,452.50 for psychologists. May I have a motion? Mr. Brown. May I have a second? Motion fails. Motion to decrease RC8 Oxridge 21302 by $200 for substitute teachers. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, Mr. Deneen seconds. All in favor? That is unanimous. Welcome, Mrs. McNamara.
Thank you. Sorry for my delay.
We are now on.
Now that we are 8, I have a procedural question.
Yes.
What happens in the case of a tie?
We will recall the motion, and if it doesn't carry, a tie doesn't carry. Tie is not a majority.
Who just first and second in this last meeting?
Burke and Deneen. Okay, so Mrs. McNamara, just so you know where we are talking about the psychologist at this point, and we are up to a decrease in a psychologist at Royal at this point, or a portion of Royal's decrease. So we are on the motion to decrease RC9 Royal 21403 by $35,452.50 for a psychologist. Do I have a motion? Mr. Burke, do I have a second? Motion fails. Motion 25 to modify RC10 Tokenique 21302. No.
9 Royal. You just did
We did
Oxford.
Royal.
Oh, you
Royal?
did Oxford.
I
You're
did
missing
Royal
it.
Psychologist.
Oh, no, you need to do Oxford, sorry. Yours right here, it's down here.
Oh, sorry. We did that. Motion to decrease RC9 Oxford 21302 by $200 for substitute teachers. We did it. Yeah. Yeah, now we're on Royal Psychologist. That's what I just did.
No, we did Oxford
Royal did,
psychologist.
and now we move on to, no.
You're missing a motion and cut it off. on your-
Okay. All right, so we did Oxford's
Now you're
psychologist.
doing
Now we're doing
Royal.
Royal Psychologist.
We just did Royal.
No, we did Oxridge.
She misses-
Okay.
Well, I said Royal.
Yeah.
We'll do it. So I will call
Her page
Oxridge
is
out.
cut off.
Okay.
We told you it's confusing, guys.
No, I know I heard Royal. That's why
Yes.
I know I heard Royal.
And the audience is sleeping.
So we will call, where's Ox's one? So a motion to decrease, we will do Oxridge's out loud now because we did, because it's a different amount.
Yeah.
A motion to decrease Oxridge 21403 by $35,452 for a psychologist. Mr. Brown opens the motion. Is there a second? Motion fails.
So now you're on substitutes on token.
Yes, okay. A motion to modify RC10 Tokenique 21302 for $27,388 for substitute teachers.
So this was, Mike, can you explain this? So this, you just kept it as it is? It wasn't a
Correct.
cut? or
There's
just-
no cut.
No cut.
No cut. I don't know why.
Keep it as it is.
So it doesn't,
Previously, there was an adjustment the board was presenting, but the administration
This
basically.
is the recommendation to
Correct.
stay at.
okay,
should
so this
stay
is a
at-
recommendation to stay at the administration's
Yes.
$27,388. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein, seconded by Mr. Burke. Any comments? All in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Any opposed? Oh, I didn't see it. All unanimous.
Now we're on Tokenique psychologist.
Okay, we'll move on to Tokenique psychologist. A motion to reduce RC10 Tokenique 21403 by $31,766 for a psychologist. Mr. Burke will open. Any second? A motion. Oh, did you second that? Oh, Mr. Brown seconds. Any comments? Okay. All in favor? Mr. Brown and Mr. Burke. All opposed? That is Mrs. McNamara, Mrs. McCammon, Mrs. Stein, Mr. Deneen, Mr. Maroney, and Mrs. Ackman. Motion fails. Moving on to motion to decrease RC11 PE 22001 by $1,000 for textbooks new. May I have a motion? Mr. Brown, may I have a second? Mr. Burke? Any comments or questions? Okay, all in favor? Mrs. McNamara, Mrs. McCammon, Mr. Burke, Mr. Brown, are you in favor? Mr. Brown, Mr. Deneen, all opposed? Mrs. Stein, Mrs. Ackman, and Mr. Maroney. Motion carries. Motion 28, motion to decrease RC11 PE 23004 by $1,650 for resource materials. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, may I have a second? Mr. Brown, any comments or questions? Okay, all in favor? Mrs. McNamara, Mrs. McCammon, Mr. Burke, Mr. Brown, Mr. Deneen, and Mr. Maroney. All opposed? Mrs. Stein and Mrs. Ackman. Motion fails. Motion carries. I'm sorry.
Wait. Okay, so now you're on
I'm gonna call it
RC11.
RC11 PE 102001 by $24,737.50 for interscholastic equipment, supplies, and rentals. This is an increase. Wait.
No, we're not doing the ice machine. She had removed it.
Oh, she pulled
Yeah.
it. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's still here.
Oh, yeah, no. It was still here, so I didn't know whether we were going to go through the motion.
No,
No.
you
Okay.
already took it off the table at the last
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
So we're on to the increase in PE.
For $24,737.50 for interscholastic equipment, supplies, and rentals. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney, may I have a second? Mrs. McNamara, are there any comments? Okay, all in favor?
I have a comment.
Oh, sorry.
Just to clarify the narrative, for Mr. Feeney, this, again, now we have 3 sports specified, but this should have included all the squash.
I believe squash was excluded, and I previously had it into my number, which throw it a little bit
off.
off.
So squash is not included, or just wait? No.
It is not, because squash, the contribution was greater than 50%.
So we left that at the 56.
Yes, did not change it.
Got it. Thank you.
Mrs. McCammon.
I'm not interested in a cut or an ad at this stage, but I am interested in having the conversation in the spring about how we handle offsite.
Okay, so
funding.
you do know that we have to vote on a cut or ad, though, now?
I do. I'm just
Okay.
making a comment.
Okay. I would echo that in the sense that I think it's a premature budgetary vote at this moment. And those are my comments. Any other comments? Okay. All in favor? Mrs. McNamara, sorry. And Mr. Maroney? All opposed? Mr. Burke? Mrs. Stein? Mrs. Ackman? Mr. Deneen? Any abstaining? Mr. Brown?
Wait, and Jill was no.
I was opposed.
She was opposed.
Sorry.
Okay, now I go back to PE equipment. It's a lot of numbers if you're watching
Okay,
us.
now we're doing PE equipment for his
Yes.
fiscal.
Motion to increase RC11 PE 123013 by $9,666 for new physical equipment. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney. He's very excited about it. May I have a second? Mrs. McNamara. Are there any comments? Mrs. McCammon.
I have a similar comment that I think at some point I'd like us to talk about minimum security requirements across the board for athletics, and to make sure that we are confident that we have a full understanding of minimum security requirements and are applying them. And then I think part of that could be where we stand in terms of thinking, for future thinking about security. That I don't think the
budget. Do you mean
protection? I mean security. Yes, I do mean safety equipment.
Okay.
Safety equipment.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Safety equipment. I'd like to make sure that at some point we have probably a district goal around making sure that we have minimum safety equipment, and then as part of that conversation we talk about what it means to be a leader in that arena.
Okay, and there was a question at the committee meeting. Was there comments from the administration on the feeling, both of the team and the athletic level, director's level?
Yes, I've asked this question throughout my career, why girls don't have caps or helmets, and I've always been told because we don't want it. But this time I really did some research on it. Checked with FCIAC, the Fairfield County Interscholastic Athletic Council, and the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Council. Spoke with the coaches, and it was unanimous that neither FCIAC or CIAC recommends it. The coaches don't want it. And I said, well, what's the rationale for it? And they said, in a sense, girls lacrosse is a genteel sport as compared to the boys. Boys is an extremely aggressive sport. And it's the belief of all of those who are involved at the state and the county level, as well as our own coaches, that should we put helmets on the girls, it's going to become a much more aggressive sport and could very well result in more serious injuries to them. And that's the reason there's always been opposition to it. I mean, Mr. Maroney's right that the state of Florida passed a resolution to state that every girl has to wear them. But it's the only state in the union that's done so. So, as much as I think, there should be helmets, I'm inclined to go along with the recommendations of the people who are involved in the athletics, because if in fact it turns out to be a more aggressive sport and there are more injuries, I would really feel really bad about recommending something that created more problems than we currently have. Sorry, Mr. Maroney.
Okay, Mr. Maroney.
Just a comment about the minimum safety requirements. I don't think we should strive for minimum safety requirements. I think we should strive for how we can best suit our athletes to be as safe as possible and still obtain or achieve maximum results. And I don't think that's the minimum safety. I think we should strive for more.
So I'd say in this sense it goes back to, I think what Mrs. McCammon and I are both saying is that clearly there are definitional terms we need to go through. There's a concern that it may be premature to be adding this in one area on one sport. I think that's what I'm hearing. It's certainly how I feel. But we will call the vote if there's no more comments.
I just wanted to echo that I look forward to this discussion in the spring where we really look at all protective equipment and how it's being applied across both our girls and our boys sports and all those sports which are aggressive, using your term, Dr. Landon, that it'll be a robust conversation in the spring, and I look forward to having it there.
Okay, so all in favor of the motion? Mr. Maroney.
Principal.
All opposed? Mrs. McNamara, Mrs. McCammon, Mr. Burke, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Stein, Mrs. Ackman, Mr. Deneen. Motion fails. All right, legal services we're going to take in two. The first is an increase to 12004 of $41,000, which would bring it to the actual run rate of $323,000. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, may I have a second? Mr. Deneen, are there any comments or questions?
Now you have to present an alternate motion.
Okay, no,
And
I'm
we vote
just-
on that, and no, because it's only one.
Okay, so
One, you have to.
I'm going to
you
have an
to
alternate
propose an
motion.
alternate motion, we vote on that. If it fails, we go back to the original.
Yeah.
If it passes, the original fails.
So this is only a one-line modification. So my alternate motion was
Hold on. So
rat.
we already had a motion, we had a second. So where are we on that motion?
You don't. She's going to propose an alternate motion.
Yeah.
So we don't.
Don't we have to vote on that one first?
No,
Okay.
no.
Before we do the alternate motion, up to you, but Dr. Landon had some comments originally around this actual number. If he could reiterate them as to why the number wasn't at the current run rate.
So do you want to discuss the 40, putting it at the run rate, why that's not?
So the, why the budget did not reflect the current run rate. The current run rate of 323,000, yet you budgeted 282,000.
We have had, I considered the last 2 years somewhat extraordinary, in that we have had 2 individuals in town bring consistent actions against us that have resulted in extraordinary legal rates. I sign off on those bills, and it's extraordinary. I've not seen anything like it. I think that's winding down, and that's our guess. And as a result, we can go back to a normal level of legal expenses, and I think we're safe with the 282.
Okay, so I have an alternate motion I'd like to propose, that rather than an increase of $41,000, I would suggest a decrease of $20,000 in bringing our FOIA expenses in-house. So I would decrease this line by $20,000 because some of the work we do is we pay for outside attorneys to do our FOIAs that I believe we can do in-house.
Is that, well, do you want a second first? I have questions.
Yeah, can I have a second on the motion? Then we can discuss it. Mrs. Stein?
So
Any comments or questions?
How have you arrived at the number 20,000? My understanding is some FOIA is already done in-house. Is the current value that we're doing out by the legal company at 20,000?
So I did not arrive at the number. Mr. Feeney spoke that he arrived at the number at the budget committee meeting. I asked what expenses we could save by bringing FOIA in-house, and Mr. Feeney said roughly $20,000. So that's how I came at my number.
And
So
that
you're
number,
saying 20 off the 282.
Yeah.
So we had looked at exactly what our FOI costs are for this, what we are trending last year as well as this year, and 20,000 was the number.
so you're basing that on trends, not on moving stuff in-house.
It is the number was trend and then removing it, coming in-house, which was $20,000.
Okay, and that number is done by the legal firm because there was a level of sensitivity around that FOIA review. Is that correct? Or was it because of overflow?
There was we have someone, we didn't have staffing in order to do it. We have one person that is currently dedicated to all FERPA requests, and that rolled everything back over to the law firm to do FOIA requests.
Okay.
And there was some sensitivity surrounding that as well.
Okay, so this is basically adding a portion of an FTE. How would you handle
This
it?
would
This is
be us
allocating-
absorbing with existing staff, reallocation of some of our
With existing staff.
secretarial staff in order to cover this function.
Okay.
So there's no FTE increase with this. This is all absorption.
Okay. Can we hear from administration on their comfort level with it? Respecting that it's your request and they've come back with the 20, but is this something administration is comfortable assuming?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right, so we'll vote on the decrease of line 004, a decrease of 20,000 to the 282. All in favor? That is unanimous. Okay, and then we go back to, so the other motion fails. So the other motion fails. All right. All right, we will move on to RC 16. A decrease in line 13011, $10,000 in mailing expenses. May I have a motion? No motion? Mr. Burke? May I have a second? Mr. Maroney? Are there any comments or questions on this? Okay, all in favor? Mr. Maroney? All opposed? Mr. Burke, Mrs. McNamara, Mrs. Stein, Mrs. Ockman, Mr. Deneen?
Abstain.
Any abstaining? Mrs. McCammon and Mr. Burke?
No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brown. McCammon and McNamara, Brown and Burke is bad seating.
So I have 1, 3, 4, 2.
Okay. Motion fails, right? Motion fails. Motion to decrease RC 18 personnel 21302 by $2,000 for substitute teachers. May I have a motion? Mrs. McNamara, may I have a second? Mr. Maroney, any comments on this one? All in favor? That is unanimous. Motion carries. Okay. Motion to increase RC 18 personnel 11024 by $50,000 for turnover. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, second. Mrs. Stein, any comments or questions? Mrs. McCammon.
Mr. Feeney, could you walk through what you think the implications are from your perspective of this change?
So we have been inching up the regular turnover rate. So just so everyone knows what the turnover rate is, it's our estimate based upon some historical trends as to when people retire or people resign and what the savings possibly would be for the replacement. For example, if we know that someone is retiring at a higher level, let's say $100,000, and we're estimating that that position is filled with someone less than $100,000 level. In the past, we've always been around the $300,000 level that we've offset the budget. Again, this is an offsetting number. We've inched that up the previous year by $50,000 from $300,000, and an additional $50,000 would bring us up to an offset of $400,000. I think when we look in general as to what that turnover is or has been over the past couple of years, it's been anywhere between $300,000 and I'd probably say around $550,000. It all depends upon, I would say, a shortage, what areas are short in relation to what teachers are actually retiring, resigning, or leaving the district.
So from a go ahead. No. So from a strategic perspective, why do you typically pick 350? That's on the low end.
It's usually in the middle of the range-ish. So anywhere between our turnover would be anywhere between 300 and 550, I'd say.
So,
And to clarify, you are not recommending this change?
I'm not. This wasn't my recommendation to
The
put forward.
administration. I didn't mean you personally. I meant the administration.
Did the administration have a recommended number?
Our recommended number was the 350 offset.
So Mike, why do you pick 350 versus splitting down the middle between 300 and 550?
Because I think it's an unknown. Again, every year that it varies, and I think it goes into, we don't necessarily know who's going to be retiring or leaving the district as of now. And it would go into which areas that they leave that are in shortage areas, because sometimes someone will leave a $50,000 position, let's say, and if it's in a shortage area, we would not be able to find someone for $50,000 in order to fill that. So the savings is not always a guaranteed savings. And at times it could be a little bit higher than that. And the district in the past does not necessarily always hire at the lower end of the spectrum, and I'm probably talking on behalf of HR. So Marge, I can kick it over to you.
Marge's fault.
He's been completely accurate, because I nag him all the time.
So I would say this is a higher end. That my look at turnover was that I do think this is a high number. I'm not sure that we could go much higher than this, but I feel like it's probably a little bit closer to a midline. And if we needed to adjust, we could. But I think it's in this budget season, it's a wise idea. So, any other comments or questions? All right, so all in favor? All in favor? Mrs. McCammon, Mr. Burke, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Stein, Mrs. Ackman, Mr. Deneen, Mr. Maroney. All opposed? Mrs. McNamara?
I'm supporting the administration's recommendation. I feel like that's.
I'm sorry, we just usually, we'll move on, it's fine.
No, I feel like I just want to make a comment to support my vote.
Motion carries. Okay, motion number 35 to decrease RC 18 personnel 31000 by $263,350 for budget control. May I have a motion? Fails. There is no motion. Fails. Okay.
22 tech ed.
Yeah. Motion to decrease RC 22 Tech Ed 25003 by $5,000 for professional development. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein, seconded by Mrs. McNamara. Any comments or questions? All right. All in favor? That is unanimous. Motion carries. Yes. Motion to decrease RC 24 Special Ed 21302 by $7,630 for substitute teachers. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke and Mrs. Stein. Any comments or questions? All in favor? That is unanimous. Motion carries. Motion to increase RC 24 Special Ed 143002 by $100,000 for the excess cost reimbursement. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein, may I have a second? Mrs. McCammon? Any comments or questions? Mrs. McCammon?
I actually would like us to talk about this number because I may want to amend this motion. I appreciate that it's on the table. I looked through the numbers. I recognize we're using, I think there are two assumptions I'd like us to look at. The eligible for reimbursement, we're using 382, and it looks like historically that number is usually a little higher. So anywhere from, with the data we have, anywhere from 3 to 13% higher. So I was wondering if we could move that baseline up a little bit. And then secondly, the second variable we really look at is the state reimbursement rate. Again, the 72.7 I think is a reasonable start, but it is on the lower side. If we start with 72.7, we're at about 2.9. But I think we could also talk about what assumptions are in that state reimbursement rate. We have talked about the fact that we think it'll be fully, maybe not in perpetuity, but it'll be fully funded this year. So with 72.7, where we want to be.
Can you back up when you say fully funded? What do you mean?
Well, we think that there's money in the pot this year, maybe not next year. But my understanding was that as a board, our feeling was that there will be money in the pot this year, but perhaps not in the future. We were basing our assumption.
So I just want to clarify that, and then the administration,
I don't mean 100%.
No, I just want to clarify money in the pot. I'm not saying I think there's money in the pot in Hartford. I have no idea what Hartford's going to do on a daily basis. I am saying that I think that we have reimbursements, or from what I hear from the administration, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have reimbursements. However, our eligible reimbursements from what you said in early January will be very different next year than what we're looking at this year.
Yes. So that's the biggest challenge. So you can't necessarily look at how much we have collected in previous years, because that changes every year.
Right.
So what we're looking at for a number right now, so we file 2 times during the year.
Mm-hmm.
One would be in December, the following would be in March, and we're gearing up for our March filing right now. That number is a lot higher than where we're forecasting for next year. So when we look at what assumptions we're using for next year, we basically take our pool of students where they currently are. We will run them up to different grade levels. So if they're in elementary, we'll run them up into middle school as well as high school. And then we'll do our forecast as to working with special education as to where we think that these students would actually change. For example, there could be someone that is in the middle school that has in a class of 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, and then when they go into the high school, that class could be a lot larger, let's just say 10. So now your divisor for all of your costs associated with that one child now has a divisor of 10 as opposed to a divisor of 2, which basically will decrease what your reimbursement level is.
Right.
So when we look at that, as well as we look at the outplacements of where people currently are and which ones are graduating out or which ones are aging out, we do factor that in as well. So that's, we do a thorough analysis as to where students are going, but we do see for next year a significant decrease as we go forward, and that would be relating to the size of the class, the programs that we've initiated, as well as people that would be forecasted to leave the district as well as graduate out from the district.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate that does look like there's a change. It looks like from a forecasting perspective that we use the number that we have, the 3.82, the December number, but it looks like traditionally that number goes up a little bit. So I think we could pop it up to 4 and still be within reason. That's a 4.5% increase. And again, typically it increases between 3 and 13%. So I'm saying our December number is typically lower. It usually goes up in March and September, even though there's some fluctuation. So I'm curious why we use the lowest number, number 1, to start, and whether that's the right number to use. And then my second is how we're going to decide what percentage. Again, I appreciate it's a crystal ball, but again, I think we have to. I think we have to be very clear about why we've chosen each of these numbers when we move here at the table. So let's start with 3.82. Why do we start with the December number and not notch it up a little bit, given that from a trend perspective, March and September are typically higher?
So we're not going at all from that number. We're basically placing the students right now, and then we're forecasting as it goes forward. It just so happened that it is in the vicinity as to where it is now.
Okay.
So as we run out the rate now for next year, it's going to be approximately a $3.9 million filing. When you factor the deduct of the 4.5 times per pupil expenditure, anything over and above that, and then we're factoring 73%. Now, in the past, we've never factored as high as 73%.
Right.
We seem to always have been consistent around 68%, not knowing necessarily what the state is going to be providing for reimbursement. And as you recall, probably about 3 years ago, I believe the town started to lose their educational cost-sharing funds when the state was basically reversing everything and telling us that this was not going to, it's something that we shouldn't be holding on to. Now, with that being said, we have been able to still get reimbursement, and the reimbursements range anywhere from 70 to upwards of 77% reimbursement. Now, I'm not necessarily sure as to what the reimbursement will be after the March filing, and as we looked as to how other people are filing, I think that the largest unknown is the state placements, really. I mentioned before some of the larger communities, such as your Bridgeport and Hartford, they don't necessarily file in December. They wait until their final filing, which would be in March, and then obviously we wouldn't necessarily know that number. We've been able to drill that. We have someone great doing our excess cost filings right now. We've been able to drill down into that number just a little bit more, and the rationale as to why it was originally thought that the timing and the amount of people that they have that are outplacement and the people that the larger communities are servicing, but what it does come down to is they hold out and they do not file because there is a significant number of state placements that occur in those districts, and they get 100% reimbursement for that. So they basically wait until the March filing when they have all of the months behind them, so they could actually forecast for the remaining months. That was something that new that we were able to determine. So what I'm basically saying is that I don't necessarily know what that reimbursement rate is going to be as we go forward, but as it looks right now, it'll be in the vicinity of 73 to 74%, I would assume, for this year.
So if we did 3.9 at 73%, that's 2.847.
Yes.
Okay. And if we did it at...
And again, our filing right now in March is much higher than the 3.9 million. And it drops because of all of the changes
part of
that
it
I
is I
meant
do
before.
think last year we've been ultra conservative, kind of waiting for what the state was going to do. The state keeps saying they're going to do something. We upped it last year. I'm not sure how long we don't want to let that trend out before we up it again. I think there's a number of significant special education bills and legislation right now. I can tell you excess cost and excess cost reimbursement were part of my conversation with the governor, which we'll talk about in the next part of our agenda, but he very much recognizes that those need to change. And so I would have concerns, especially this year in this transition, being more aggressive than recommended by the administration. And I know to Mrs. McNamara's point, I'm doing something different than I did earlier. But on this one, given that there's so much guesswork, I think I put it on at first at like 150. I wanted to go up, but in my conversations, I would be wary of going higher based on Mr. Feeney's recommendation and being too aggressive with this one.
But it sounds like Mr. Feeney's recommendation is consistent with the what Katie's motion was.
Yes, so I think I put up like 150, and even I've walked back on that, and I'm at 100.
Yeah, I started. Do we have alternate motions?
Yeah.
So
Any other comments?
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Feeney.
Yes.
All
I
in-
do have a comment.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Landon has a comment.
Yeah, we had many discussions before we put the number that we did in this budget. And it's always, I've always been cautious, extremely cautious in this area, because I've lived through times where the ratio in tough economic times was dropped by the legislature from, I can't remember the numbers now, but like it could be from 4.5% to 3.5%, or 3.5% to 2%. And now with the governor suggesting that the building construction reimbursement be reduced, it seems to me they're going to be looking, the legislature and the governor are going to be looking for a lot of places in which to cut. Excess cost is a ripe tomato, if you will. So I continue to feel very confident with the numbers we put in and recommended as part of the superintendent's budget. But, you're gambling. No matter what, you're gambling. It's my advice.
Okay. With that, no pressure, board, but the motion on the table is to increase RC 24 Special Ed 143002 by $100,000 for the excess cost reimbursement. All in favor? That is Mrs. McCammon, Mr. Burke, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Stein, Mrs. Ackman, Mr. Deneen, and Mr. Maroney. All opposed? Mrs. McNamara? Okay. Motion carries.
I'm sticking with the administration.
Motion 39 to modify RC 25 fixed 82003 by Mr. Feeney. Drum roll
What's our
for
number?
you. What's my number?
0. So we're recommending that it stays at 12,177,000.
Okay.
12,100,000.
So the motion is to modify by 0. So if it fails, it's okay.
Modify by
if it
0.
doesn't get
Okay,
seconded.
so let's
Is there a motion? And it fails.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion to decrease RC 26 21302 by $1,500 for substitute teachers. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein, Mr. Burke, any comments? All in favor? That is unanimous. Motion to increase motion carries. Motion to increase RC 26 ELP 143003 by $4,676.11 for ELP tuition. May I have a motion? I'll move. May I have a second? Mr. Burke? Any comments or questions on this? Mrs. McCammon.
I did hear that administration would support it. I had asked them to specifically think about the impact on demand, given that we have to have a 50-50 classroom, and whether or not they were confident that this would not have an adverse impact on enrolling typical peer models.
Based upon the tuitions in all of the surrounding programs within Darien, even with this increase, we're not going to be as expensive as the others. So I can't see any negative impact on our program.
Okay.
And it's a very, very strong program. It's a good program, and it's critical, really, as a pre-kindergarten program.
Any other comments? Mrs. McCann?
So I know that part of this was also to bring other tuition, not in line, but somewhat to account for some of the contractual increases. So I just would ask if we could keep a tuition schedule on an ongoing basis that reflects when there are contractual increases, because I think, to the extent that we can ever prepare for when we know a 4.5% is coming, et cetera. Again, I don't think it's a problem, but I think it's something that we should be, when we know there are contractual increases coming up, we should be aware of looking at tuition at the same time.
I just want to be clear on what you're looking for, because you'll see the contractual increases in your budget book every year. Is there something separate you're looking for?
I want to make sure that whenever we discuss EOP tuition in a year of contractual increases, that the two are discussed at the same time.
Okay. Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
May I just make a comment? I think, echoing that point, I think as the Darien population is looking as to whether or not they would like to either return or join our ELP program as a typical, it's important that they have a better understanding, I think, of the tuition. I think that's fair. I think for us to be able to offer that, and right now, as I understand it, it's sort of a question mark. They really don't know how much they're going to be charged next year, so they're kind of making a decision on an unknown, and I think if we could incorporate this discussion out of budget, I think that I would prefer that.
I'd have to look. If you're talking about setting tuition outside of budget, we'd have to be looking at making budgetary decisions outside of the budget process.
We could talk about, we're talking about contractual increases, and if philosophically we want to tie the tuition to that we could have that conversation. So right now we have offers out to families, and they don't know how much they're supposed to be paying. I think we could do a better job in letting our population, our parents know this is what the rate will be, because right now they don't know. I mean, they'll know after tonight, of course,
but this is when we do that. I mean, this is when we set the budget and we determine the increases across the board. We can't have a special meeting in October to figure out what the ELP tuition is going to be and then do the rest of the budget. I mean, it's always going to be a rather minor increase. We've had discussion from the administration before that it's not, I mean, tuition doesn't 100%, cover the cost of it anyway. So I understand what you're saying, but I don't know how we could even do that at an earlier
I guess my only
time.
point is you could maybe, as part of some sort of conversation with special education, maybe their update, you could talk about it, but I think you can't preclude the right of any board member to look at tuition during a budget season.
Oh, absolutely.
So you certainly can't preclude that you could set it.
No, I agree.
earlier.
I mean, I'll throw out an example like athletics. We're looking at that as a financial ramifications for our families, and we've agreed that we're going to make that a part of a broader conversation, and we're going to do so in the spring. We've all agreed this is not the time to make those budgetary changes, though we all have our right, because it's budget season, we're talking about dollars. So I'm just applying sort of that same philosophy now to our ELP tuition. Of course, it's anyone's right to bring that topic up, and we can talk about it. But I think in fairness to our parents and to the ELP population and budgeting purpose, it would be, I think, more prudent if we could take that conversation offline so that the administration's prepared with their budget and they know what we're all thinking. Mr. Brown.
So I just want to make sure, we originally were looking at a 3% proposed administrative increase. We're increasing that to 4.5, so we're really talking about a 1.5% difference here.
Yeah, it's about $90.
Just want to make sure.
Each.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so are there any other comments or questions? Okay, so all in favor? Mrs. McCammon, Mr. Burke, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Stein, Mr. Deneen, all opposed, Mrs. McNamara, and Mr. Maroney. Motion carries. We're getting close to the end. Okay.
That's it.
I know, they're like hovering over numbers over there. We'll move on to the capital modifications.
Would you want me to, just to make sure I have all of this correct, would you want me to just go through what I
Yes.
have to make sure that it
Yes,
matches
let's
what
match
everyone
real
else is
quickly.
keeping track of, and I'll go through really fast if that's...
Okay.
DHS substitute teachers, a deduct of $3,644. Hinley substitute teachers, a deduct of $1,425. Home substitute teachers, a deduct of $1. Oxford substitute teachers, a deduct of $200. PE new textbooks, a deduct of $1,000. PE resource materials, a deduct of $1,650. Legal services, RC 16 administration, a deduct of $20,000. Personnel substitute teachers, a deduct of $2,000. Personnel turnover regular, an increase in the offset of $50,000. Tech ed professional development, a deduct of $5,000. Special education substitute teachers, a deduct of $7,630. Special ed excess costs, a deduct of or an offset of $100,000. ELP substitute teachers, a deduct of $1,500. And the early learning tuition program, an offset of $4,676.11, which would decrease the superintendent's budget further by $198,726.11. When you factor that in with the administrative recommendation, the 2019-2020 revised Board of Education stands at $100,687,103.39, which represents a percentage change of 2.61%.
What's the actual percentage increase?
The actual percentage increase of over the current year is 2.61.
What was the absolute again? I'm sorry, Mike.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
What was the absolute number?
100,687,103.39.
He's going to repeat it again.
Yeah,
'cause
we
have
got to
to
do
vote
that
on
whole
it.
motion. We'll
We're
vote
going
it
to do
and
a
repeat
real
it
motion
again.
on that.
All right. We will do capital. So I'm on 42. You on 42?
Yep.
Okay. A motion to modify the capital budget to move the DHS security booth to priority 2. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein, may I have a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Mrs. McCammon? Discussion. Mrs. McCammon?
So I'll start with a comment, and that is that I read how the security booth would help us, but what I don't know as a board is whether or not we really feel that we want a campus that is closed to traffic or not. And I think that is a question with larger implications. I think there's traffic issues. I think there's also security questions. I don't know which aspects of both we're solving for. And I appreciate that the analysis is not fully done. I'm not totally sure what the drivers are, even with your lovely memo. So that is my hesitation at this stage.
Mrs. Stein.
I agree with Mrs. McCammon, and I feel like it's putting the cart before the horse to just put one security booth in. I think we need a more robust look at what we're talking about philosophically and actually physically. Just closing off that entrance will create serious traffic concerns, in my opinion. That's where main drop-off pickup flow goes. Then you're also leaving the sports loop access open. I have too many questions, and I just would prefer us to have a more robust conversation and a full study of security, traffic flow, and just the implications of closing a campus.
Mr. Brown.
Again, I appreciate the memo. I just share the same concerns with Ms. Stein, and that's the Nutmeg entrance. I don't see any plan there, and I don't know what precludes anyone from coming in and taking a left. So I think this really needs to be looked at more comprehensively at this stage.
I have similar concerns as expressed by my fellow board members. I think it may be a very worthy project, but that there's enough board questions that to move it forward to the other town bodies as one of our capital projects may be premature. Any other comments? Okay, so motion to modify capital budget to move DHS security booth to priority number 2. All in favor? You're moving it
Priority
to a priority
1.
No, we're moving it to a priority 2. It's at a priority 1. So if we put it at priority 2, it is not something we bring forward.
Do we have money in there for this? Do you have money for the studies? Was that embedded in the 150?
Yeah, the studies are ongoing in this current budget.
And they're not embedded in
They
that
are not
150?
embedded in that. So if you move it to priority 2, this is something we can look at next year, but is not something we move forward this year. So, correct. All in favor of the motion as read? Is that unanimous? That's unanimous. The motion carries. Motion to modify capital budget to move home classroom unit ventilators to priority 2. These were 2 separate projects, so we're taking them as separate motions. May I have a motion? To open it up, Mrs. Stein, a second. Mr. Brown, any comments or questions on this? I do. We asked Mr. Lynch what a number would be that he would need to do the studies as requested.
$80,000.
$80,000. So
Is that a separate line item?
I'm gonna make a motion 44.5 and add back in. So this right now is to move the unit ventilators back to a priority 2. I would anticipate a motion for the studies at some point, if that's anyone's concerns.
Wait, what is your new motion?
I haven't made it yet. I want to put in the studies. Do I have to modify this, or can I add in a new motion for you? I can put in a blank motion, right? Or do I have to modify? You want me to modify? Sorry, we're just working out the procedural part of this all.
You want to just create a new motion?
Yeah.
So you want this one to, you're not going to modify this because you want to add something to the capital.
Well, actually, I think
Because
what
the
we said
capital
is
budget
when
what
we
it is,
did
so
this to,
adding an item, I actually.
or we'd have to go back and do it in priority 2. Because it's a study.
But you would add a line to the capital budget for a study.
Yes. Or
Can
you
we
could put a
mod-
priority 1 of $80,000 in
No.
next year.
For a
and
study.
then move the remaining amount
So
out.
modify
right,
this. I think
with a
it's-
reduction
I
of
think that's
451
better.
subtracting
Okay,
by
let's do that.
$80,000.
Yes, why can we
Okay,
modify
but you
this?
have both projects at 451, correct?
So there,
2
that included, the 451 included the abatement.
But is
There
that-
was another project from Holmes that was for the other classrooms for
Okay,
293.
so the abatement has a dollar amount. The classroom unit ventilators has a dollar amount assigned to it of what?
Just so I. The 1930s wing classroom unit ventilators, including abatement, is for $451,788. 451,788.
788. Okay, so here's what we'll do. I'm going to put a motion on the table to reduce
Okay, wait a second.
that project
The homes.
unit ventilator of $451,788 to $80,000
So you're reducing by
for the
what dollar
purposes of a
amount?
study.
So you're reducing it by
What's the dollar amount?
371,788.
I'm going to reduce it by 371,788. Way to be there, dude. For the
study.
purposes of a study.
Okay. so
Makes
we
sense
need-
to everybody?
We need a
Okay,
first and
so,
second.
um,
I'm assuming
Mr.
you're
Burke,
making the motion.
Rawl made the motion, Mr. Burke seconds. All in favor? And that is unanimous, so the other motion fails. This fails. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. We will move on to motion to modify the capital budget to move the homes, ventilation, and staff room in the 1930s wing to a priority 2. May I have a motion? Mrs. McCammon, may I have a second? Mrs. Ackman? Any comments or questions? Okay, no, this one didn't need a study.
This doesn't need a study?
This doesn't need a study.
I thought this was the same one.
I thought
The
they
No.
were.
the study would include this.
No, it didn't need a study because it didn't require abatement. And what Mr. Lynch found is that the other project, and he thought it might be similar throughout the district, would require abatement issues. This project did not require abatements, but Mr. Lynch still thought that this was a priority 2 project. The board moved it to a priority 1. And so the modification that was put on the table was to go back to Mr. Lynch's modification of a priority 2. Any other comments or questions? Yeah. Okay. So, all in favor?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that Mr. Lynch didn't start this as a 1?
No, the board moved it to a 1.
This is to a 1.
This is
And
homes?
The other
This is homes. The board moved it in December to a 1, so it'll be in your books that way.
Okay, so that,
The administration recommended it 2.
Yes. Okay. So, all in favor?
May I ask?
Yes.
If in the verbiage it says there is no current proper there is currently no proper ventilation for these areas. If that doesn't constitute a priority 1, why are we moving into priority 2? Why don't we just take it off? If we don't think that there's a need, it shouldn't be priority 2. It should just be priority. It shouldn't be on the list.
Because Mr. Lynch didn't think that he thought it was something that he wanted to continue to look at and monitor, but he did not believe that it needed to be a priority 1 in this budget cycle. I mean, he prioritizes projects all throughout the year.
Mrs. Hockey?
Mrs. Brown?
I just would like to comment, it's my recollection that during that meeting, we moved this to a priority 1 to have further conversations around it, and that was the purpose of moving it to 1, and I think that was how it wound up there at the time, just for clarification.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions around this? Are we ready to vote? Or, I'm sorry, Ms. McCammon, did you have something?
Just the other comment, just for the board to remember, part of the conversation was part of why it's not a 1 is because he was waiting, because he thinks it's possible we will make other modifications to the building. That's why it's a 2. That's a large assumption.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so the motion on the table is to modify the capital budget to move the homes, ventilation, and staff rooms in the 1930s wing to a priority 2. All in favor? That's everyone except for, I haven't gotten to oppose yet. You're opposed? Yep. That's everyone except for Mr. Maroney. All opposed? Mr. Maroney. Motion carries. Okay, so you're going to give me a number, Mr. Feeney, right?
So I have the priority one projects were originally at $2,397,324. $2,397,324. We're subtracting out from priority one projects. 150 for DHS, 371,788 for homes. That leaves us $80,000 remaining in priority one projects. And then we're also subtracting out $293,157 for a total of, reduced out of priority one, $814,945. So the priority ones now go to $1,582,379.
Okay, say it one more time for us.
1,000,000.
Duke, is that right?
582.
1,582,000.
$1,582,379
So that's what we're approving.
Okay.
has been approved for priority one projects.
Okay, so now, can you give me the operating number again? I think I have it as 100.
So the 100
687.
million 687,103 and 39 cents.
And it's a 2.61 increase.
It's a 2.61% increase.
Okay, so I need a motion to approve an operating budget of $100,687,103.39, representing an increase of 2.61% for the 2019-2020 school year. Mrs. Stein so moves. Mr. Deneen seconds. All in favor? That is unanimous. Congratulations, guys. And then, can I have a motion to approve the capital budget of $1,582,379? Mr. Burke so moves. Mr. Deneen seconds.
Can I make a comment?
Hang on one second.
See, it's hard to write all this.
It is. Yes, Mrs. McCammon.
At some point, I just would like us to look at capital budget numbers and have a good sense of sort of what we want to aim for every year. There's some fluctuation in our numbers. We are, based on the history we got, we're usually around $3 million. This is a bit lower. I think just in terms of responsible management, while it doesn't make sense to force things that either don't fit for workflow or other reasons, I think it's wise to try and manage that volatility over time.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you. All in favor? That is unanimous. All right. Go team go. We now have a budget that's ours to get through to the rest of the town. I don't know what he's saying. I can't read your lips tonight. I'm going to move on to an update on the state legislative matters. I had a really quick update for you in that I talked to our state representatives and state senators, which I will give you, and then Mrs. Stevenson was quite frankly gracious enough to inform me the governor had asked to meet with her, and she asked if I could join them, which I appreciated very much. It was a good meeting. I do think that the governor was incredibly interested in what we do and how we do it, on kind of what questions we face every year, and certainly the conversation of the excess cost reimbursement came up. He said he is hearing that everywhere, and that it is something that they will look at. The issue of teacher pensions also came up. His comment was they needed to figure out how to hand it down to the towns. It was not a matter of if. So how exactly that happens, I'm not entirely sure, and that is something that I think both Mrs. Stevenson and myself, and both of our boards of selectmen and the Board of Education should and will keep an eye on. I will say the governor was incredibly gracious with his time. was really interested in learning. It gave me a lot of hope for the sense that he was incredibly knowledgeable on many subjects and on areas where he was not afraid to ask questions. And so I think based on Mrs. Stevenson's comments, it's the first time the governor has ever asked to come and sit and meet and hear from us in her memory. So I think it was a good meeting. I think it was a good conversation opener, and certainly a good signal that he is listening both to the cities and the small towns. I know after us, he was going right up to New Canaan. He had been in Greenwich the night before. So that was very positive. He did not express a lot of support for regionalization, certainly not forced or mandated regionalization. He did think voluntary regionalization, where it mattered and where people could share services, was something that all districts should be looking at. So originally when this made the agenda, I had spoken to Representative Blumenthal, who was not yet had his education committee meeting. I think everyone knows at this point that the education committee voted to move both regionalization bills forward to a public hearing. As of this afternoon, that date was not yet set. People can go give public testimony if they feel strongly on the issue. Our statement has been received. We can also submit it as part of the written testimony. They do need to read in all testimony received in written form into the record. Representative Blumenthal at the time did not think that it would be unusual if these bills were to move forward, given that they're to move forward to public hearing. And he said we should not be surprised if they do, and it's exactly what happened. After that, he did not express where he thought they were going, but I would say he wasn't also overly enthusiastic about it. I did speak with State Senator Bob Duff. He did not comment on Senator Looney's bills. He felt strongly that his bill had a hard stop at districts with 2,000 students. For him, that was sort of a magic number. He was not looking to compromise on that number. He thought numbers higher than that didn't show the economies of scale in growth. And in that sense, he didn't think Darien, Wilton, New Canaan, or Weston really needed to be particularly worried. This isn't where he was looking. He said he was looking at districts where there were 100 children, 200 children, and he felt that those really needed to be looked at. I certainly expressed our concern that he can have a hard number, but that doesn't mean the entire legislature does. And so that forced regionalization was not where I had heard my board be supportive or our board be supportive. And so I did that quite strenuously with him. He quite strenuously felt that he was at a 2,000 mark number and did not think his bill applied to our concerns as they were. So it was a good conversation. It was good to hear that he really thought that this was not, this is not where he was looking for it to affect. And like I said, I did express our concerns. I do know the Education Committee received our statement, and also the Durg A board chairs all reached out via email. One of the Durg A board chairs reached out, and they kind of asked to share any statements boards had made. So given that was out in the public, I felt comfortable sharing with them. They are all watching this closely, and that's really all I can give you right now. But it was heartening to see that the governor wasn't in support of forced regionalization, that Senator Duff didn't think his specific bill applied to us, and Senator Looney I have not heard back from, but I have emailed now twice. So if I hear anything back, I'd be happy to share it with you. That's really all I have. Yes, Mrs. McNamara.
Thank you so much for the update, Tara. And just to reiterate that when the public hearing is set, if that or comment that you wrote up could be sent up to them. I know you've already shared it with our representatives, but if that could,
I will.
But could be definitely put in for the record.
Sure. Any other comments or questions? Okay. If I hear anything else from anybody else, I'll be more than happy to share it with you as quickly as I can. We will move on to action items. Personnel reports. Mrs. Sion.
Some resignations and retirements for your information.
Okay. So is there an updated one or just the one still in the packet? No. Okay. So I love this. May I have a motion to approve the personnel items as outlined in the memo dated February 12th, 2019. Mrs. McCammon and Mr. Burke, all in favor? Thank you. That is unanimous. Is there any public comment this evening? Mr. Davis.
Jack Davis, 197 White Street. I'd like to thank the board for their hard work on this budget and getting it into a 2.6 range. I was kind of hoping that we might get it to the 2.5s.
Kids first.
What?
Kids first, Mr. Davis.
Yes, yeah. Well, we weren't talking about changing education. I also want to add that at the RTM Rules Committee meeting on Monday, the Rules has instructed the town clerk to send the board position on the legislation to all RTM members, just so that they're fully abreast of what the board's position is. That brings me back to something else that was mentioned here. While it's incumbent upon all the boards to vet, and citizens as well, to follow and address any potential legislation that's going on in Hartford, you need to plan the budget for what's happening now. And we even stress this frequently in F&B. Otherwise, the town could tax everyone for $4.5 million for a potential loss in car tax revenue, or tax now for a potential loss in pension, or ECR, or in fact, we could have been, the boards of Darien and New Canaan could have been discussing what the education will look like next year for the combined district. That isn't where it goes. Our legislative process works well, and that is, as you have just completed your board decision and the Board of Selectmen will be doing it on the 25th, goes to the Board of Finance. They're not voting until April. If legislation is moving forward beyond that date, RTM committees will hold up on our vote to address anything that could potentially be happening. We'll be voting in May. That gives us a significant amount of time to determine what is transpiring up in Hartford should something that was unanticipated actually get voted on down the road. And I think it's important that citizens hear that so they're not worrying. Should something happen after our vote in May, I think our Board of Finance, and though I don't want to speak to them, but they have been very straightforward that should pensions come or a change in the car tax come, that a supplemental tax would be given to make up that difference. And so, again, it's important for all boards to plan for what we have today and not worry about some of the other things. That does, though, bring me back to excess cost. I think, and for somebody who understands the nuances and the changes and everything, because I've been dealing with this for almost 10 years, the other side of this is that we do believe that with an $100 million budget that some flexibility needs to happen, because you don't know what students are going to show up between a February budget and a September opening of school or August opening of school. And so flexibility needs to be there. We also know that during the course of the year, security measures have come up, which you didn't know about, and I don't need to know the details of it because, as I said on something else, the Allies didn't tell the Germans about D-Day. So we understand that that flexibility needs to be in the board. On the other hand, the board has received significant funds above what the budget has been. And while they have been put to good use, we're not questioning that, we also want to make sure that we are not
Quickly, Mr. Davis, you're over 3 minutes.
Okay, overtaxing our citizens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What number of White Street, Jack? I should know by heart.
197.
Sorry.
Any other public comment this evening? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Maroney, Mr. Deneen, that's a wrap.